Hello everybody and welcome to Biology Unit 1. Today we're going to be looking at the characteristics of living things and what makes them alive. But before we start, I would just like to acknowledge the images that I got from Creative Commons. They're from Google Images. And for a more in-depth bibliography of where the images came from, you can see the science website links in the footer. You'll find a bibliography there. So before we begin, let's have a quick science joke. So first question, Chemistry Cat is asking, why can't you trust atoms? And the answer, of course, is because they make up everything. All right, biology joke, stupid chemistry joke done. Let's move on. So this is kind of the first unit in science, in biology that you've come to. And let's actually have a look at what we're going to be looking at. So kind of more of a reminder this unit on what we've done in the past, discuss a few of the key things. Now you've got your worksheet that I hope you've got and you can fill out as you go through. You'll also have your online learning as you go through this to complete the questions on Zaption so we can look at feedback during class time. Remember, your class questions are for you to complete and they're for your notes, and you need to keep them nice and safe. All right, so in case we don't know what the different characteristics of life are, all right, we can always remember the term Mrs. Gren, where each letter of Mrs. Gren corresponds to a different characteristic of living organisms. So the first one we're looking at here, I wonder if you guessed it, all right, it's movement, okay? Now, there's three images here that kind of show the movement of different types of organisms. So animals, like human beings, of course, we have legs and arms. We have muscles that are attached to bones that allow us to move around. Okay, single-celled organisms like bacterium, for instance, like we're seeing in this image here. Okay, they don't have bones. They're unicellular, so that means that they're made up of one cell, but they do have what we call a flagellum, which is this thing here. Okay, and they can wiggle. Okay. And move the bacterium around. Sperm cells also have a flagellum, okay? So they can be able to move around and get where they need to go. I know we don't see plants move all the time, but they can, all right? They can actually grow and move in response to things. So this is what we call a phototropism. So it's actually growing or moving towards the light. It happens pretty slowly, okay? But obviously you can see the effect over time is that it's actually growing towards a light source, okay? We call that a phototropism. All right, let's move on. The next one, hoping you'll be able to guess what this is. Okay, I'll go over it at the end, but it's actually, well, it says that right there in the middle. It says respiration. So what is respiration? Okay, just pause the video at this point and try and think what it is. All right, again, try and get to the bottom of the image. So, okay, I'm presuming that you've done that. Okay, so we can remember respiration is the process whereby organisms will break down break down sugar like glucose using oxygen, okay, to release energy, okay, and in the process of that, they'll release carbon dioxide and water. The carbon dioxide is, of course, what we exhale, and the water is also, or some of it is exhaled, some of it is used in components in the blood or in the plasma of our blood, some of it is sweated out, and some of it is exhaled, or some of it is actually removed via the kidneys, which we'll come to a bit later on. So we all living organisms respire, okay? Okay, can you guess what this one is? It's actually what we call sensitivity or irritability. Okay, and that means the ability to detect changes in our environment, or what we call stimuli. Okay, so in humans, of course, we have our different sense organs that allow us to detect these changes. Okay, we've got our skin, and we've got pressure sensors in our skin. We've got our ears and our noses, tongues, and our mouths. Okay, to help detect these different changes. Okay. Obviously, those changes, or what happens then is we've got nerve cells in our body which the messages travel down as electrical messages, either to our spinal column or our brain, and we're able to react to those stimuli that we sense. Okay, but different organisms sense in different ways. So we know over here you can see the blood in the water. Okay, sharks, of course, have a very, very, very strong sense for blood. They can pick up literally something like 1 part in 100 billion parts of water. 1 part of blood in 100 billion parts of water. So it's pretty impressive. Okay, this is a catfish, and you can see these barbels sticking out of its chin here. Okay, these are sensory organs, and it can run these over the sand and detect very, very small movements that are going on around it. Okay, so lots of different organisms have lots of very different ways of sensing stimuli. Okay, I'm just going to prop back to this one over here. This is also being sensitive. It's sensing the stimuli, which is the light source. Okay, so this is another way of also showing that organisms can be sensitive. Okay, this one here, obviously the image displays is showing us that the growth of a plant. Okay, so what do we mean by it when we say the growth of a plant? Okay, or an organism. Okay, we could mean that it's growing, increasing in size as it grows, and the relative size of its body parts change as it develops. Okay, but what we're really talking about is that it's a permanent increase in size and dry mass, and it's due to an increase in the size of the cells in the organism. Remember, the cells won't increase in size forever. They will as an organism grows, basically. But it's also an increase in the number of cells, and that's the main part. It's the number of cells that are increasing in the organism to give it that extra growth. Okay, this one here, I'm hoping you can guess what this one is, but we're looking at reproduction. All right, so reproduction comes in 2 different forms. We've got sexual reproduction, okay, which happens in both plants and animals. Here, this is being an example within an animal. So you've got a sperm cell penetrating an egg cell, fertilizing it. So you've got the genetic information in the nucleus of the sperm cell moving into the egg cell and fertilizing it. That would be sexual reproduction in animals. In plants, of course, it's slightly different. It's where the pollen, the nuclei of the pollen, fertilizes the ovule of the female part of another plant. Okay, and that would be sexual reproduction in plants. Now, remember, this was just a very quick overview, so you want to be thinking about these ideas, but it's not so important that you know the real nitty-gritty yet. It's just getting that overview. In this image down here, we're going to be looking at asexual reproduction. Now, these guys here, you might remember them as being bacteria, all right, and they're reproducing in asexual reproduction by what we call binary fission, okay, which is the process whereby they replicate their genetic material. Okay, so this is the genetic material up here and up here. Okay, that's being replicated, and we've got the cell wall of the bacteria starts to pinch inwards, okay, in a process known as invagination. Now, eventually, the cell membrane inside here will pinch completely closed, and it will separate into 2 separate bacteria. So that's what happens in bacteria. Fungi like yeast do something a little bit different again. They reproduce asexually by budding. It's essentially very, very similar, but as you can see here, when it happens, okay, the cell membrane stretches out here. Okay, so the membrane of the yeast stretches out, and it's almost like the membrane forms a small kind of pocket just off the opposite end. It's still got genetic information inside of it, but eventually that piece of membrane simply just buds off, and it's got a complete copy of the genetic information that you can see here. So the genetic information moves, it starts to divide and split, and it starts to kind of bud off, and so we call that budding. It can happen again in a few different ways in plants. It can happen in this image. You can see here where you've got a parent plant, and underneath you've got runners. Okay, there's lots of different types of beans or tubers which do this kind of process. They have these runners which run off, and a offspring plant, which is genetically identical, sprouts in a different location, but it's actually connected via this runner that can run either just above or just under the soil. And these are genetically identical plants to the parent plant. So here's your parent plant. It can also happen where a plant self-fertilizes. We've got excretion, okay? So in humans and animals, we have to get rid of waste products. Okay, that's what excretion means, the removal of waste products of metabolism. Metabolism simply means all the different chemical reactions which happen in our body. So we get rid of urine using our kidneys, okay, and we get rid of excess water also doing the same way. We also get rid of excess water by sweating. Sweating is also a way of cooling us down, so it's also a way of being sensitive to what's going on around us. And of course, you can see this chap up here sitting on the toilet, okay, and he's defecating or generating feces, which is a waste of undigested materials. All living organisms produce waste, but we'll get rid of it in slightly different ways. In some single-celled organisms like bacteria, it's simply removed the cell wall of the bacterium, and it kind of just is excreted out into the environment around it. So we'll do it slightly differently. And the last one here is nutrition. Okay, we need to get nutrients into our bodies. So we have two different types of nutrition. We have what we call heterotrophic nutrition, which is where we're an example of heterotrophs, where we need to eat things in order to get our organic molecules. So glucose, for instance, our proteins have to be taken from food that we eat, and then they have to be digested and broken down and assimilated into cells and then built back up into new molecules. Okay, so humans, bears, fish, all animals are examples of heterotrophs. Plants are what we call autotrophs, which basically means they make their own nutrition. So they're making glucose through the process of photosynthesis. And lots of plants. There are also what we call chemotrophs, okay, which will actually get their nutrition by digesting other living organisms. So things like some fungus are chemotrophs, okay. Now that's all of the main points of Mrs. Gren: movement, respiration, sensitivity, growth, excretion, reproduction, and nutrition, okay. Now I'm going to show this last image here. This just to show that sometimes it's not always easy to identify things as being living or non-living. Okay, these, you probably recognize them from when we did this in year 9, but these are actually viruses. Okay. Now there was a big dispute at one time as to whether viruses were living or non-living. Okay, and it's still something that's very much up for debate because they perform many of the processes. Okay, they can move around, they can excrete waste products, they can kind of do a sort of very similar thing to respiration. But what they can't do is they can't reproduce without a living host. So what they actually end up doing is they come in, they land on a host cell, which is this big cell down here, and they inject in their DNA, and their DNA joins to the host cell's DNA and is then replicated. So what happens is the infected cell starts making new viruses until eventually, okay, the virus number builds up in the cell and the cell bursts, pushing out all these viruses into the environment. Okay, so a lot of people don't think they're actually living. Some people do. It's not always as clear cut and dry as we might think. Anyway, that's characteristics of living organisms in a nutshell. Make sure you finish your notes on that for our first lesson in biology, and I look forward to seeing you next lesson. Thank you.